Pressure for Neal Brown to beat Pitt this week? Well, it's the Backyard Brawl, one of the best rivalries in college football, so there's always pressure to win. That's Paul Rockel, also known as Mountaineer Paul, and our Locked On West Virginia host joining me here on the show. Let's start there before we get into the matchup itself, Paul. How badly does Neal Brown need to win this football game?
Extremely bad. If you look at Neal Brown, one of the biggest criticisms of Neal Brown is that he has won a big game on the road in his career. I don't know if Pitt qualifies as that, but it's similar to the Ohio State or Michigan philosophy that you can go 1-11, but the one you better damn well win is the Pitt win, right? This is the biggest rivalry that we have. Alongside Virginia Tech, they're probably tied in some people's eyes, but Pitt's been going on for over 100 years. It's truly one of the historic rivalries of college football that got shaken up because of realignment. And now we're at the point where these kids are having to be educated on the rivalry, although it's been back for 2 years, and they finally have a taste of it. If you don't know how exciting it is, go back and look at the last 2 years' games. They've broken a lot of records. The crowds are really fired up, obviously, at these games, as they are at rivalry games. But, yes, to answer your question, this is a huge game for Neal Brown, and it's on the road. You know, it's going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, that stadium is extremely loud, and it'll be full.
Yeah, and I think that if you're a college football fan and you haven't watched a Backyard Brawl before, I'll be honest with you. The first one I watched really start to finish was last year. I'd seen clips and heard about, but it's a fantastic college football viewing product. You're going to have a hostile crowd. Things are going to get chippy. It's everything a college football rivalry should be. And I think for Neal Brown, he doesn't, get fired, obviously, if he loses this game. But if you look back after this season and the Mountaineers, don't want to go back to him as their head coach, it feels like, Paul, things would have to spiral. And this would be the first step along that spiral. And that's where the pressure element, I think, ratchets up for Neal Brown in addition to the rivalry factor.
Yeah. I will say this. Obviously, it's really unfair to ask any team to start with Penn State, to start the year. That was a tough way to start the year. And so in game one, before you figured anything out, to play a team with so much talent on defense, it'd be hard for any offense to do. I don't think our offense really played as well as they could have, much like last year. We played them in game one and lost. You see us playing against North Carolina and shred those guys. Obviously, we were a lot better by the year's end. Similarly here, this is our second Power 5 game in 3 games, and it's going to be a tough game. Obviously, Pat Narduzzi is the defensive-minded head coach. Kate Bell has been brought in as their offensive coordinator. They've got a top 30 guy at quarterback who transferred in from Alabama that's really been shredding the first 2 games of the season. And if you want to look at a problem area for the Mountaineers, it's been pass defense, and they are ranked in the 80s or 90s now at this point in pass defense. And Holstein, while I'm not sold on him at all, certainly has the pedigree to give the Mountaineers some trouble in this game.
He certainly looked good last week. Pitt had a dramatic comeback win. I mean dramatic. They were trailing big time in that game on the road against Cincinnati, and then you look up and they squeak out a win, 28-27, the final score. Eli Holstein had 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. Desmond Reed had over 250 scrimmage yards, rushing and receiving. He was over 100 for both. For West Virginia's defense in this game, Paul, you got to be able to slow those 2 guys down, which is easier said than done, but they're playing with a lot of confidence after the comeback and the performances they had last week. Feels like that's where you've got to start, is disrupt the quarterback and slow down Desmond Reed.
Desmond Reed is an electric player. Go look up Deuce Vaughn. That's exactly what he looks like.
I like that comp a lot. That's a good comp.
Electric player, and scary. He really is. This is the most skilled offensive team I've seen Pitt have in a long time. Sincere Lee is their 3rd receiver, probably. He's a really good player. He's probably a number 2 guy in most teams. Kanata Mumfield, who's been there for a couple years, had 125 yards last week against Cincinnati. He's really good as well. They're going to be a tough team to stop on offense. I'm just not sold on the quarterback. I don't think he's as good as he's looked the first 2 games, and I think the competition has a lot to do with that. I think West Virginia has just been figuring out a lot of things. West Virginia hasn't been getting beaten as much as it's all about alignment and assignment. That's where they've lost the first two games on defense, even though they didn't lose the second game. I mean, as far as how bad the defense has looked in the back end so far, that back end has been the problem. And I think it gets fixed this week in the Backyard Brawl better.
When you look at this game for West Virginia from an offensive standpoint, Paul, what do they have to do to win this game on the road? According to our friends at FanDuel, they're a 1.5-point favorite. So this is essentially a toss-up in the eyes of the odds makers. Another reason that you should be watching. It's a great rivalry, but it should be a great football game as well. How does West Virginia win the game offensively?
The same way we did last year. Control the clock, run the ball. They probably can't stop us from running the ball. We've been able to run the ball on pretty much anybody we put our minds to. We've got a first-round left tackle. We've got a guard that's going to be projected mid-round draft pick on the left side, and then we've got a center that's really come on. We've got 5 guys that have played a lot of football, probably one of the most experienced offensive lines in the country there. So that's what you lean on. You've got 2 running backs that most people would say are really good. You give Jaheim White the ball and let him do what he does. I think he's the best back in this game, and that includes the kid over there at Pitt, but we'll see. But you control the clock. You don't put too much pressure on your defense, and you let Garrett Green be Garrett Green. I think Garrett Green really shows up in this game. He didn't play in last year's game. We had to win that game with the backup, which was a 16-7 slobber knocker. So I think this game's going to be a bit higher scoring. Probably take the over.
Yeah, I think the over right now, according to FanDuel, 63.5. So you can see a lot of points in this football game. Is there anything as classic Big 12 and what used to be the Big East, of course, when that was still a thing for football, RIP. Let's get to predictions here, Paul. I think this is going to be a wildly entertaining game. I'm going with the home team, though. I'm going against your Mountaineers here. I think Pitt has got a lot. They have to manage the emotional letdown. They've got to manage that component because when you have a big comeback victory where you're trailing and it was 21-3 or some big deficit last week, you can have that emotional letdown factor. But when you got a toss up, I'm going with the home team here. I like Pat Narduzzi as a coach. I think Neal Brown is solid. I think this is going to be a really fun football game to watch. But give me the Panthers 35-31. I think they get it done.
Yeah, I think we beat them last year with a lot of the same players. They have definitely upgraded, but I still think we're a better football team, and I think we'll prove that on Saturday. I would never pick the Pitt Panthers in a win. It would never happen.
What would have to happen? Is there any scenario that you can possibly envision in which you would pick Pitt to win this football game?
You know what? Let's say next year, let's say we go 6-6 again this year, and Neal Brown's still sticking around for another 7th year next year. We continue to live in mediocrity into perpetuity. Then yes, then I will probably be in that kind of situation where I may pick Pitt just out of spite.
What's your score prediction?
I'm going to go 23-13.
23-13. So you're taking the under that 63.5 number.
Yeah. I need the Mountaineers defense to show up in this one, so I'm probably picking that with my heart a little bit. But yeah, I need the Mountaineers defense to show up in this game. I'm not worried about the offense; it'll be there.
Mountaineer Paul, host of Lockdown West Virginia, one of our newer shows here at the network. Go check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Paul, appreciate the time.
Thanks, man.